He has spoken on the topics faith, family, and freedom in Cuba, Belgium, Brazil, Congo, UK, and all over the USA to crowds from 14 to 40,000. International leadership speaker, trainer, and coach. Author of Learn to Raw Leadership, Attitude Hack, Live a More Excellent Life, 5 Battle Strategies of a Victorious Warrior. 2021 President's Lifetime Achievement Award recipient. Founding partner of the John Maxwell team. Toastmaster International Speech Competition semi-finalist. Founder of Tell It Like It Is TV, ThatGuyRocks.com and ThatGuySpeaks.com. Creator of Story Power TV, Transforming Grace TV, and Leading Leaders Podcast. Producer of 4 TV programs and podcasts for Liftable TV and World Trumpet Television, as well as multiple social media channels. Please help me welcome J Loren Norris.
I was stopped today behind a school bus at a stop sign, and then a bus stop, and then a pickup location, and then kind of at a railroad track. I mean, I remember way back when, I've only ridden a school bus a couple of times, but every time I've been on a school bus, there's a giant sign right above the driver's head. It says, "Stop, look, and listen," at every railroad track, and it has the little crossing arm thing and the big sign, and you got to stop. And you're supposed to stop and put your red lights on and open the bus door and listen for a train and look both ways, because even when the arms come down, it may be too late because your bus is too slow to get across those tracks, especially if they're rough. And I think there's a great symbol for leadership. And that's what I want to talk about in this episode of Leading Leaders. Subscribe now for our extensive video library of leadership lessons promoting faith, family, and freedom. I'm J Loren Norris with Leading Leaders Podcast, and it's pretty fascinating to me to watch how many leaders have this charge forward kind of an attitude that they don't care about who's behind them or how they feel or what's going on in their world or about their life at all. In fact, I see leaders who are so determined to charge forward, torpedoes be damned kind of an attitude, that they don't even care if in their own moving forward they crush the spirits of the people that they lead. They don't care if they bring about the demise of someone who could have had a bright and great future, but their hopes are crushed. There's a reason in college football, for an example, they have what's called a redshirt freshman. It's that first year where they're really here to learn the scheme and learn the team and learn how things are done. You don't throw them into the fire right out of high school, especially some of these kids that are coming out early. They're coming out of high school at 16, 17 years old because they started early, because of where their birthday's at. And they finished their high school career, or they're really, really good and they're getting drafted into college or recruited into college the very first year. And it's a great opportunity for them, but the coaches who throw them right into the lion's den of an oncoming defense, or throw them up there against the greatest running backs that they'll see in their lifetime, and they get busted up joints and torn ligaments, and their bodies just aren't ready for that. Same thing with the first year out of the college and into the NFL or the NBA or any other professional sports. What you think you know about sports changes overnight the minute you move into the pros. These are the best of the best of the best, and they got there for a reason. We forget sometimes in leadership that moving into the world of finance or politics or military, there's a lot of similarities there. There's a lot of opportunity to throw somebody in front of a bus, pun intended, or to throw them out there into a place where they're in the lion's den or in front of the wolf pack. They are the chum for the sharks, because you're not really paying attention to what's their best well-being, their best long-term. Maybe you're even using them to deflect your own failure. You can blame it on the new guy, the new gal. You can put some of that off on them and say, well, we were still in the training process. Give me some time. I'll work with them. Obviously, if they can't keep up, then we'll have to get rid of them. But rather than admitting your own failure, your own mistakes, your own stupidity, it's easy to blame the new person. But sometimes it's just a matter of not understanding that They have all the potential in the world, but they're not quite ready yet. I had a friend who at one time played in the NFL. And one of the comments he made one time was kind of stunning to me. He said, when you get into that first year of actually being on the field, the worst thing you'll ever hear is, well, he's got potential. And I thought, well, that's kind of a silly thing to say. I mean, don't you want people with potential? And he said, no. If you've reached this point, the first year of your professional career, and you're not living in your potential, it's probably never going to happen. What it means is you haven't been coached up, trained up, or worked out hard enough. You haven't applied yourself to the best of your ability to actually live in the potential that you have. And I thought, that's a pretty harsh statement, but if it's true, I wonder how true that is in leadership, because we see a very similar problem in leadership, don't we? We see the idea that there are a whole lot of people who feel like, well, eventually they'll catch on. And they're 2 years and 5 years into their career. And it doesn't matter what that career is, a professional such as an attorney or a medic, a doctor, a surgeon. How many years in are you still working on your potential versus how many years are you in your stride actually doing what you're made to do at the best of your ability, having applied all of the skill and all of the discipline and all of the talent necessary to do that job the very best that you can. And see, I'm trying to draw a dichotomy because I know that there are people that come into your leadership circle, people that you're meant to influence, that you're meant to push to be a little better, that you're meant to give opportunity to, that you're meant to drive them for the very best that's in them, bringing out that potential. And early on in your relationship with them and early on in their career, that's absolutely necessary. I don't know if you've ever watched this Special Forces training where they bring celebrities on board as guinea pigs as new recruits. And they basically put them through what they would put someone through if they were joining the Navy SEALs or the SAS or the KGB. They have to do the same kind of high-flying acrobatics, diving in cold water, holding your breath underwater, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Some pretty grueling physical expectations. At one point, they had to run down the side of a dam 350 feet face forward on a rappel rope. That'll scare the bejeebers out of you, especially if you're afraid of heights. But see, these exercises are normally done by, well, frankly, young people whose frontal lobe isn't fully developed yet, meaning their idea, their understanding of the consequences of harm don't exist. It's why young boys jump off of things way too high to be jumped off of, or fly motorcycles through the air or bicycles through the air. And usually by the time they're 25 or 26, when their insurance rate starts to go down, it's because, there are consequences for every decision I make. See, these people are going through these special forces reenactments in their late 30s and 40s and 50s, and some of them their late 50s. That's scary enough. There are some people who are 50 who can barely get out of a recliner. And these people are out there. I realize they were pro athletes for a long time, but I also know that a couple of them retired early because they realized the damage that pro athletics was doing on their body, their joints, their muscles, their bones. They're hurting. See, there's a reason we train for these extremely intense psychological and physically demanding jobs while people are young. Their bodies can take it. Their minds are not overwhelmed with the consequences. They're capable of sorting a decision out, about following orders, about doing what they're told to do, and yet they're not really overwhelmed by the consequences of what could go wrong. That frontal lobe just isn't there. They don't quite think the same. It is the reason our insurance rates go down, by the way, because the minute that frontal lobe begins to develop and you think about short-term and long-term consequences, you judge every action differently. That's why your drivers tend to get better when they're over 25 years old. It changes the who that they are. But do we take that same kind of consideration in leadership? Right? But if you're taking somebody who's 30 years old and they've been in television all of their life, they've never been asked to do the kind of stuff that a Navy SEAL is asked to do, or they're 50 years old and they've retired from a career, or they've got some other kind of notoriety, that's what makes them a celebrity. There are a couple of people in the current season competing who are reality TV stars. One of them is a reality TV star whose parents went to jail. That's the story. That's your qualification. Let me tell you something. Just because you have a fascinating story, just because you have a backstory that causes people to perk up their ears and go, oh, that's interesting. I want to know more about that, does not qualify you from a mental standpoint, an emotional standpoint, or a physical standpoint to do everything. If you've heard the phrase, your story sells, sometimes your story is just a great description of a mess. It's not a qualifier. The fact that you went through a disaster doesn't make you anything any different than everybody else who's been through a disaster. The qualifier is, how did you handle it? And that's where leadership needs to be like a railroad track. The bus at the railroad track stops, looks, listens. A great leader should do the same thing, finding someone who has the right resume because they've got the right credentials, because they went to the right schools, because they learned the right things. That doesn't mean they have credibility. It doesn't mean they have character or integrity. It doesn't mean that they've got everything in their life nailed down. I listened to a long interview with Patrick Bet-David and a guy whose name I can't remember at this moment, but he was quite the con man. I mean, quite the con man. Did a decade plus in prison because of the quality of his cons. But his cons, the way he describes them, could be duplicated by anybody with a minimal integrity. In fact, in many of his cons, he had 12 to 15 other people involved in the con. Fraud. He just invited them to participate. He didn't even tell them what you're doing is wrong. He just told them, this is what I want to do. I'm going to do it like this. And they said, well, I don't see anything wrong with that. And they moved forward. And he sucked a lot of people into the process. $4 million worth of real estate and mortgage loans that he shifted around, finagled around, moved around against property that wasn't valued at that. He had quite the con going on. And then of course, he had a lady interest in his life as well. And she was perfectly okay with that because, according to him, she wasn't all right at all. But see, there were several people in his life that should have been aware of his behavior. They should have been catching up with what he was doing, with what he was thinking, with the process that he was following. And eventually, it turned out the FBI were onto him, and it took them a minute to catch him. But when they did, the hammer fell pretty hard. As a leader, do you have people on your team who they come with the right credentials? I mean, if you just look at the list of successes, the man owns X number of real estate properties, and he owns apparently a bank, and apparently also a mortgage company, and if you just went through the list of all the things that his documentation claimed he was capable of, looked good. It looked real good on paper. Like a bumblebee. See, the problem when we don't take the time to stop, look, and listen is that we find ourselves caught up in the facade that someone intends to sell us. We get caught up with the illusion that what they're offering is exactly what they're going to give, that they're going to deliver on every promise that they've articulated, that they can actually stand up behind everything they've promoted. I was watching a quick little video this morning of a guy who was going for a Guinness Book World Record. And his feat of accomplishment was to change a tire. You heard me right. Now, I know there are a lot of young people today who cannot do that. They're going to call AAA, or they're just going to give up and call into Uber. If they have a blowout on the side of the highway, they're pretty much toast. I know when my kids were growing up, my youngest daughter, for an example, had to rotate the tires on the car she was given the day she got her driver's license before I let her drive it home. We pulled over in a Walmart parking lot with a hand jack, it was hydraulic, and hand tools. And she took off both tires on one side of the car and rotated them, then jacked up the other side of the car and took off both tires and rotated them. And it took probably an hour. But on the way home that night, one of those back tires blew out. It was a used car when it was given to her. One of those back tires blew out. Had she not rotated those tires, that used tire would have been on the front. And that blowout would have probably meant a loss of control at highway speeds for a driver who's been driving for a day. Had her license that day. Now I want you to think through what that means. Preparation. Now, Mr. Guinness Book of World Record, obviously, this man can change a tire. It wasn't enough for him to change it quickly. No, he had to get the car in the middle of the ring, the arena, whatever that space was, doing donuts. And while the car was spinning around in circles, he popped out of the driver's door, took off the front tire, put another tire on to get his Guinness Book of World Record. That's a pretty impressive feat. Tell me, though, where does that show up on your resume? Oh, wait. I mean, what category is that? Is that similar to saying best-selling author when you know that you can buy a best-selling author? Now, to be on the New York Times best-selling authors list for 11 weeks or 25 weeks running, that's a whole different ballgame. To say that you've sold 15 million copies of your book, whole different ballgame. Jack Canfield's first book, he considered it, I didn't quite make my vision. His plan was to sell 100 million. He only sold 89 million. Shucky darns. I didn't sell 100 million books. Even if your royalty is only $1 a book, $89 million, a pretty good little heyday on your first book. I think I'd keep writing if I was you. But it doesn't show up on the resume that you can change the tire on a car spinning around in circles and that qualifies you for something special. I mean, is that the guy you want to be your CPA? Is that the guy you want to be in charge of security? Is that the person you want handling your bank loan? Is that the person you want handling your mortgage or buying and selling your house? Well, I don't know. What in the world is changing the tire on the front of a car while it's doing donuts qualify me for? Well, he is a stunt man. I guess if you need to change the tire on a car while it's spinning around in circles or maybe dropping out of an airplane in a Mission Impossible movie, he's your guy. But see, that's the problem with leadership is sometimes we have what we call the halo effect, and that is, well, they're a celebrity. That means they can do anything. And some of the people who have washed out of this Special Forces show are former NFL all-time greats. I mean, they hold records in major sporting events. World champion downhill skiers, female figure skaters that are best in their world, best in class, Olympic gold medalists. I mean, these are not schmucks. They're not, mom and dad out of the kitchen trying to come out here and compete like this. These are people who've put in their hours and done their discipline, and yet they quit because the demand on them is so high. It's not just about the resume. It's not just about the celebrity status. Trust me, I know a lot of people. I know a handful of people I won't, but I could name them who, if you give them enough money, they'll make you a celebrity. If you pay them enough money, everybody in the world will know your name. It will not change your capability. It will not change your competence. It will not change what you are able to do well. It will not change your character. It will not change your integrity. It will not make you a man or a woman that people should trust. Let me tell you the opposite side of this same coin. There are times in people's lives, it's happened in my life, it's happened in the lives of people that I consider my mentors, people that I've followed for years, listened to things that they've said, that life happens. A death in the family. A loss. Greg Laurie, as an example, a man who has been very proficient at what he does as an author, as a speaker, leading a large church, has done incredible things, but his son took his own life. How do you deal with that? And see, as a leader, you might look at that and go, well, if everything in your life is falling apart, it's probably because you're falling apart. Or you can look at that and go, you can't control everything in your life. And sometimes the circumstances will get the best of you. Sometimes there's an incident that prevents you from moving forward. COVID, anyone? 9/11, anyone? October 7, anyone? January 6th, anyone? See, these are life-changing, life-directing, life-rearranging moments. There are times that everything you've planned for in your life will not prepare you for a moment like that. And in that event, in that incident, in that instance, the circumstances may dictate the decisions that you make. And you might find yourself making decisions you would have never made otherwise. As a leader, you can't simply believe that your orders, that your instructions are the end-all be-all, that every decision you make can never be questioned. You cannot stand back and say, well, I'm going to get rid of this person. I'm going to fire them, move them on, send them to somebody else's team because they are non-compliant, until you take a minute to ask about the backstory. What is the why behind the non-compliance? Why did they not do what you asked them to do? I had a client a few years back that hired me for the specific purpose of driving them from East Texas to San Diego. I thought, what I'm going to charge you for the amount of time and hours and travel and expense to drive you to San Diego is absolutely a ridiculous investment. Because you could get on a plane and fly. And it wasn't until about halfway back from San Diego, after many hours of conversation, that this client revealed to me the reason they don't get on a plane anymore is because they landed at Boston Logan at 8:41 a.m. on 9/11. And they were trying to get in a car to drive to D.C. to go to work when the Pentagon was hit. Now, I don't know about you, but that might change the way you look at air travel. It might change the way you feel about big buildings and large spaces and large groups of people. It might shift your worldview just a little bit. PTS, anyone? Oh yeah, it's a real thing. And it changes the way you think and relate and correlate with people. See, a leader who doesn't bother to ask those questions, to stop, look, and listen, and really get to know the people that they lead. John Maxwell quotes it often. I'm not sure who the originator of the quote was. May have been Mother Teresa, but the quote says, nobody cares how much you know until they know how much you care. If you're trying to lead people and you expect them to follow every order, to do exactly what you said, exactly the way you said it, implicit, immediate obedience, you should probably stop for a moment and consider the fact that the people you lead are, well, they're human. And they have circumstances in their life, and they have incidences in their life, and they're connected to hundreds of other people. The closing salvo of Navy SEALs sadly ends in the loss of the life of one of the guys. One of the guys that's kind of been a superhero all along. And when he goes, the rest of the team is in an emotional funk. And yet they're called on by their commanders to do the impossible while grieving the loss of a teammate. Can you imagine that request? Now, there was a moment when leadership said, if they can't do it, I get it. And then higher-ups who have no relationship to those people said, we need the job done regardless of who has to do it, and you're the only ones to do it. So I don't care what's going on in your world, buckle up and get it done. There's a time and place for both. But as a leader in the normal world, where life and death is not always on the line, take a moment, like a bus driver at the railroad tracks. Stop, look, and listen, because the people you lead are people, and life happens. I'm J Loren Norris with Leading Leaders Podcast for Tell It Like It Is TV. Have a blessed day.
Lauren Loren is a master teacher on storytelling, and I learned so much. I'm really going to have to sit down and go back through everything, and I think I might have to have some more coffees with Loren, but it was totally worth my time, and I really highly recommend it if you're looking to grow your ministry, grow your business, grow your career. Loren will serve you well.